Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Moment of silent meditation, please. Amen. I'm an alcoholic named Joe Anderson. And morning. I'd like to welcome everybody here. It's good to see a good crowd here. And it's been a wonderful 3 days, and I kind of hate to see it end. I do. And I think we've had some wonderful speakers. Our committee has done a usual outstanding job in getting this meeting together. This time I'd like to ask Ray S. to read the purpose, please.
I'm Ray Sterling, and I'm an ain't been drunk lately alcoholic. Our purpose. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you, Ray. I'd like to ask Polly C. to read the steps, please.
I'm Polly Carroll. I'm an alcoholic. Number one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Thank you, Polly. Are there any announcements? Anyone wish to announce a meeting?
Joe, over at Nashville on July the 15th, which is on a Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, will be. It's not a regular Zoom meeting, it's a call meeting. And this purpose is to get started workshop and sharing sessions to instruct and inform GSRs, human safety, and commitment. And they're all, I think some of they'll be there. I'd like to see good representation from everywhere. And they'll all be getting a flyer on in the next few days.
Okay. Anything else? Oh, anyone interested in acquiring tapes, check with Franklin here at the tape desk after the meeting. We'll take care of that. Earl, you should have just stayed on your feet. I understand the day has a little special meaning to you. If you'd come up here right now, I've got a little something I want to give you. Right up here.
Well, I understand today is your 8th birthday in this program, and with a great deal of pleasure, I'd like to give you a chip for that.
I certainly appreciate that. I appreciate all you people, too, because, you know, without people like you, I wouldn't have made it 8 years early, and can't go that long without taking a drink or doing something. So I really appreciate you people, and I'm very grateful for this presentation of this 8-year chip. Thank you so much, Joe.
You're quite welcome. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Herb S., who will introduce our speaker for this morning. Hey. Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everybody. I am Herbert Spradlin, and I am an alcoholic. Good morning. Well, to begin with, our speaker took a little of my thunder in trying to introduce him because he went to the bathroom. I was going to give him an opportunity here, and this is going to be part of my introduction because I didn't want him to be in any strain while he was up here, as I am. And Earl, we're glad to see that you are doing something now. The main thing is that this is going to wind up the little ball of wax here. And I don't want to make the mistake that a lot of people did. Well, it's been an awful good meeting up to now. Because our cup is already running over. And I know that it's going to fill the saucer this morning. I've talked to this guy, and I know so much about his operation now, I'm afraid to say anything about it. So, without anything else, Bryant B., from Mount Airy, a little bit north of South Carolina.
Thank you. My name is Bryant Bivins, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi. I appreciate those kind words. I can remember back a few years, and I don't ever want to forget when nobody had any kind words to say about me, and I appreciate anything nice that anybody says about me. I do have one announcement in reference to the walking on water incident last night. A little note in the paper this morning that funeral arrangements for Franklin Williams, who drowned in the pool last night, are incomplete. I was a little bit nervous this morning until beautiful little Alateen says, "Don't worry, we've fixed it up for you. We've already talked to the man for you, and you don't have any reason to be nervous." And I appreciate that. I appreciate it very much. You know, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells us that our lives will be based on inspiration, that we'll come to thrive on it. And certainly I believe this is true with all my heart, because I've been inspired this weekend in particular by Alateens who have expressed their love for me, by Al-Anons who have done the same thing, by members of Alcoholics Anonymous who have given me continued hope, by some of our old-timers who are here and have kept the door open for me when I decided that I want to stay sober. So the inspiration is here, and I've drawn from it, and I appreciate it. I want to thank Bill and the committee for having us up here. Marion has enjoyed this weekend. Everybody's had their wives to stand up, so I'll have mine to stand up, Marion. I'm an alcoholic, and by the grace of God, I'm alive today, and through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been able to maintain sobriety since Christmas Day of 1960, and for this I'm eternally grateful. For the way of life, for the friendship, for the fellowship that has been given to me through this program, it's something else. It'd take me all day to tell you about it. All day to tell you about it. I've been wondering this morning what I'm going to talk about, and the only thing I have left to talk about is my story. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do. In order for me to fulfill this little prayer that the Alatine said for me, I'm going to have to get something straight. Anything that I might say this morning is something that I've learned from you, something that's been given to me. If anything that I say this morning helps you in any way, I want to remember where it came from. It's a gift from God and a gift from you, because when I came to this program of Alcoholics Anonymous in Christmas Day of 1960, I didn't know anything. I didn't know my name, really. I was as sick as a man could possibly be, and anything that has been given to me since that day is a gift from God, and I don't ever want to forget it. It's not of my own being, my own making. It's from Him. I do wish one thing, that I would have been first. I might have had something to say if I'd have been first. I'm about like the old colored boy was down in Alabama that was helping a man. He was hired out as a laborer. And they were cleaning out a cavalry stable right after the war, and they were all full, and this man had a pickup truck, and he had this laborer helping him, and they'd shovel a load of manure, and he'd go through the gate, and he'd have to go through all the military procedure. Halt, who goes there? It's I, John Smith. I have one pickup truck, one darky, and one load of manure. Pass on through. So this went on from daylight until dark, and they had the last load that evening, and they started going through the gate, and the man said, halt, who goes there? And about that time he heard a rap on the back of the pickup truck, and he said, boss said, this is the last time we're going through the gate. I wonder if you'd mind introducing me first. So I wouldn't mind at all being first this morning, but I only have one story to tell, and in order for me to change that I might have to get drunk, and I don't want to get drunk, so I'm going to get on with it. And I'm going to tell it the best I can. I don't want to stay drunk long. I want to tell you more about what's happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous and the new way of life that I've found. Now, I had no chance of being anything but an alcoholic. Franklin said last night that if we got any worse about the age, that I might be prenatal alcoholic. I don't know, but I do know one thing, that I was born into alcoholism. I was born into it. My father was an alcoholic. I have married an alcoholic, and I've known nothing but alcoholism all my life. So we'll start from there. I'm one that believes that my alcoholism didn't start with my first drink, nor did it stop with my last drink. I believe that all the underlying causes and everything that makes up an alcoholic were present in my life. My father was an alcoholic, and we suffered, you Al-Anons will probably identify with this, we suffered a great deal of anxiety. We didn't know what time he was coming home, who he was coming home with, if he was coming home at all, and what condition he'd be in when he got there. So there was a great deal of anxiety present in my life. There was a lot of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the known. And this fear grew. My father was a very capable man, and he made a lot of money, and he was alcoholic, and he was just as capable of spending it as he was making it, more so. So I was deprived maybe of a few things that some of the other fellows had, and I had some resentments at an early age. And these resentments grew into bitterness. This bitterness grew into hate. So all of the characteristics that we talk about and the character defects that make up the alcoholic, these were present in my life at an early age. And I had one more distinct attribute. I was the biggest liar that ever lived. I don't mean after I started drinking. I mean from this size up. You know, I started practicing my lying real early. I'll give you an example. All the kids would tell my daddy can lick your daddy, and my daddy's better looking than yours, and my daddy makes more money than yours. And I fell right in line, and I had my daddy on a pedestal in front of these guys, and I got sick at school one day. And they called him to come after me, and he came after me, and he wasn't half drunk. He was falling down drunk. And the principal had to take both of us home. And then I started having that fear of being found out. You know, are they going to know that I'm a big liar? Are they going to know what kind of guy I am? And from there, I started to withdraw. When I was 15 and a half years old, some boys in our neighborhood had a party one day, and they invited me, and they had some blackberry wine. And they said, have a drink. And I did. And I had another. And after that second drink, it just seemed to go all over me, you know, from my toes and my fingers. And the only way that I know to describe it, it's about like swallowing an umbrella and it opened up on the inside of you. It just seemed to go all over me. And it did for me what I had been looking for all my life. It made me something that I wasn't. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't bashful anymore. There was no anxiety anymore. And I was what I wanted to be. And nobody had to ever ask me from then on to have the first drink, because I knew what it would do for me. This is where my practicing alcoholic drinking started. And the next day, this is why I believe that I was an instant alcoholic. The next day, I was deathly sick. I was in the bed, and this sickness was not the first and foremost thing in my mind. The first thing in my mind was how good I'd felt the night before. The sickness didn't particularly matter. I was willing to be sick a little bit in order to feel like I did the night before. So I didn't have much of a chance to be anything but an alcoholic. My drinking progressed. I went through the whole thing that everybody here has that's got a drinking problem. I did all the rationalization. I did everything that you'd done. When I was about 21 years old, I realized that maybe I wasn't drinking like everybody else. My friends who were drinking didn't get in trouble. I liked to drink, but every time I got drunk, every time, and I couldn't account for my behavior. I was likely to pass out in your front room, or if I'd never seen you before. Or I would pass out in your automobile, or waiting for a bus, or most anywhere. I'd just pass out. So I had to learn how to drink. I had to learn how to walk straight and not stagger. I had to learn how to talk and not slur my words. And I had to learn how to act like a gentleman. And by the time I got these perfected, I started taking the morning drink. So I didn't have a chance at all, really. But I realized that I wasn't drinking like anybody else, and I decided maybe that I'd do something about this. And my friends weren't getting in jail. My friends weren't getting in trouble. My friends were going to work the next day, and I wasn't. So I thought maybe if I were to assume some responsibility as a husband and a father and to settle down, this is what I needed. Well, it took me 3 years to make up my mind to do this, and I've done it. I married this girl, and this is where I might add, too, that the finger was placed on me the first time. about my drinking. A lot of people had mentioned to me, that maybe I was drinking too much, but this doctor told me. He said, Bryant, I went in to get a blood test for my marriage license, and he said, Bryant, I've been noticing you of recent and your drinking. He said, we have a little farm out on the edge of town. We keep about 15 alcoholics. He said, I've studied a lot about alcoholism. He said, I've studied a lot about your drinking pattern here. And he said, I think that you're having problems with it. If you're not already an alcoholic, you're a problem drinker. He said that you've got many productive years ahead of you if you stop. But if you continue, not much can be promised for you. So I told that doctor then and there that if he'd kindly give me that little piece of paper that I came in there for, that I'd be on my way, and if I ever needed him, I'd call him. Real smart-like. And I did call him. It was about 6 months later that I had to call this good doctor. I did real well for about 2 weeks. I didn't drink anything but beer. Yeah, I don't like it either, buttermilk, but I was drinking it. And then I got back on the hard stuff, and about 6 months after we were married, it looked like everybody was putting the pressure on me to quit. My boss would say, why don't you quit? And I'd go home, and my wife would say, why don't you quit? And I'd get mad and go to my mother's, and she said, why don't you quit? And I'd get mad and go to the bar, and fellas say, you pretty nice fella, but you getting in trouble from drinking, why don't you quit? I even went in a public restroom one time, and the guy asked me, why don't you quit? So the pressure was being put on me, so I said, well, hell, I'll quit. I'll just quit. One Monday morning, I thought it was a real good time for me to quit. I'd never tried to quit before in my life. I felt bad that Monday, so I said, this will be the day that I quit. So I quit that day. I didn't have anything to drink, and that was another good reason to quit. I stayed out of work, and as the day progressed, I got real nervous, and I got real shaky, and I didn't know what to do, but I was determined that I was going to quit one time and see how it was. And when my wife got home from work that afternoon, I was really in bad shape, and I asked her to call the doctor, and she wouldn't do it. But she dialed the telephone, and I talked to the doctor, and this is the first time that I ever apologized to anybody in my life. I told him that I was sorry for the way that I talked to him in his office that day, and I needed his help then. I wouldn't have apologized to him had I not needed his help, but I did. He came out that night, and he gave me a shot, and he carried me to the farm the next day. And this was the first in many, many trips to hospitals, drying out places, institutions, a whole thing. I went to all of them. Every place in North Carolina at least once, some twice, some more than that. But every time anybody would get me sober, I got drunk again. It's as simple as that. As long as I had somebody that I could depend on, I drank. And it got worse. I didn't... People told me that it would get worse. When I was out at the doctor's farm, this is the first time I'd heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. He told me, and I think he informed me pretty well then. He said, of all the men that we've had here, that we've helped get sober, the ones that are staying sober, the ones that are going to AA. And he said, I'd advise you to go. But, I'd already figured out what I'd been doing wrong. I'd been mixing all that stuff. And who wouldn't be sick mixing all that stuff? So I decided just to drink vodka. One thing, and stick to it. And I tried that way, and I was back out at the farm in 2 months. And everything I drank made me drunk. Everybody, I used to blame the company that I kept. But everybody that I drank with, I got drunk. And every place that I drank at, I got drunk. Now, you hear a lot of people taking this geographical cure, moving around from town to town looking for some. Well, I never did get sober long enough to move. I stayed put because There was plenty of liquor right there where I was, and I didn't see any need to louse that up. I just kept drinking right there. I did move around quite a bit after I got sober, but while I was drinking, I didn't see any need to move and didn't. So I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous at the ripe old age of 25 and a half. Should have been there 5 years sooner, but I didn't. I was in our state hospital there. I don't know why they sent me at that particular time. I couldn't imagine why they'd sent me to the state hospital, because, you see, I'd started substituting drugs, pills then, for liquor, and I was a pill head. I'd been taking pills for 2 months, and I'd been chasing it with liquor, and I was more than likely apt to do anything. It didn't make any difference what it was. And they were worried about me, so they sent me to the Goonie Roost. And I wondered why I was there, but I wondered why they kept me in that straitjacket for a few days. They did it for their protection, not for mine. Really. But I wondered why. And then when I got back from Dix Hill, everybody calls it Dix Hill till they've been there one time, then they call it State Hospital. It sounds a little better, you know. But I got out of this place, and now I'll tell you the kind of shape that I was in. Everybody, if you would agree to take Anniversay, could get out in 14 days. So I agreed to take Anniversay. I raised my hand, but they didn't let me out. They wouldn't let me take Anniversay. After 21 days, you are reviewed before medical board, and if you've made considerable progress, they discharge the majority of them. But they didn't discharge me. After 28 days, anybody can get out, but I didn't. You know, they kept me there. And I thought maybe I had a cold, and I thought maybe they figured it might go into pneumonia is the reason that they kept me there a few extra days, but I know now that wasn't what it was. They were afraid to let me out. But when I got back from Dix Hill, my wife knew of some people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and she wanted me to be like them. So she called them to me, and they came. And these men explained as best they could to anybody that wouldn't listen how Alcoholics Anonymous works. And they carried me to 4 or 5 AA meetings. And I went, you know, to see. I thought maybe I'd learn how to drink and not be as sick as I'd been. This is what my real purpose was for going. But the first meeting that I went to, they were talking about sobriety. And I sort of made a little face, and then they were talking, some of them talking about staying sober from now on. And I said, no, I can't do that. I know I can't stay sober from now on. But I did notice one thing in particular, that these people were decent. And these people were happy. And these people wanted me to be happy. I wanted to be happy my way. You know, nobody could tell me anything. I wanted to be happy my own way. So everything they said went in one ear and out the other. And I didn't learn anything. That is not an open mind when it goes in one ear and out the other. That's stupidity. But I didn't learn anything from Alcoholics Anonymous. They tell me you get what you go for. If you go to get a job, you might get a job. And if you go to get your wife back, you'll get your wife back. And if you go for a handout, you might get a handout. So if you go to stay sober, you might stay sober, too. I was going for my wife's nerves. And she got better. I didn't, but she did. She was given a little encouragement for the first time in her life that maybe I was trying to do something. But I didn't want this. I wanted to drink and not be sick. I paid an awful lot of attention in those days to these old men who frequented the drying out places. You know, they'd sit around and tell some tales, and it fascinated me. I listened to every word they said. I took it all in, and I stayed drunk the next 7.5 years. they can really learn you something. I wish that I could say that I'd been sober since the first day I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. But my next few years of drinking, I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember a thing about it. And when I tell you that I'm grateful for my sobriety, I speak for a lot of people in my hometown, particularly the law enforcement officers and people that are bothered. They're glad to see me sober too, because I was a pain. I really was. And I saw myself, and I would tell myself, this isn't me. They'd lock me in jail. And I'd say, this isn't me. It really isn't. This can't. But it was. I saw a piece in the paper yesterday that an unidentified man was arrested and for assault on an officer and in public drunkenness, and as of yet they didn't know his name. But you know, if it had been me now, I always made headlines somehow. And I'd read it, I said, this can't be me. I didn't plan for it to be this way. I didn't want it to be this way, really. But it was. This was old Bryant Power talking. You know, this was Bryant Power in action, lousing up everything and everybody. And to make a long story short, in the next few years, I fell from grace. I'm not proud of this, but neither am I ashamed of it. Because if this is what it took for me to find this wonderful fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm grateful. It was Christmas Day of 1960, and I was on Skid Row in my own hometown, just about a block and a half from the main business district. And the bells were ringing, and they were playing Christmas carols, and people were singing Joy to the World, and I didn't know what joy was. Hallelujah. And I didn't know what that was. And they were celebrating Christmas, and I didn't know what that was. I only knew that when I woke up this morning that I was as sick or sicker than I'd ever been in my life. And I had in my possession that day a pint of vodka that cost $2.30. And I don't know where it came from, because for $2.30 you could have stayed drunk 3 days in that neighborhood. But I had this vodka and I drank it. And the more I drank, shapes that I got in. And I didn't know what to do. And I did like all of you did when it doesn't do you any good. I panicked. I asked God to show me the way to go. I said, if you'll show me the way to go one more time, this time I'll make an effort. And by the grace of God, I haven't had a drink since that day. I, too, like Franklin, evaluated my life that day, and I looked at myself and I saw a young man that had every opportunity in the world. I used to say that I never had an opportunity, but I did. I didn't take advantage of it. There were a lot of people who loved me, and I'd lost their love. There were a lot of people who had respected me at one time, and I'd lost their respect. I had nothing left. And this was my world that I had made for me, and I was left with it. I looked at me, and I saw a man that had been locked up on numerous occasions, and had never been locked up sober in my life. I'd written a lot of bad checks, but I'd never written a bad check sober. I'd hurt a lot of people, but I never hurt anybody sober. And I realized that day that my problem was alcohol, and that I had to do something about it. And I would do something about it. And I called a place that's called Damascus Home. remember that. It was a free ride, and that's all I could afford. And this man gave me an opportunity. And this was a non-medical facility. I've been used to the drying out places and, that give you a little formaldehyde or drink every 4 hours or some pills. And they had made withdrawal from alcohol easy. And I never had appreciated sobriety. But this was a cold turkey treatment. And I shook, and I shook, and I shook. And it was 2 weeks before I got my head on straight, so I could even think. 4 days before I could fill out an application, I couldn't remember my people's name. This is the shape that I was in. And from this point on, I'll try to tell you how that I have, through the help of God and through people like you, recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of body and mind. After I'd been at Damascus for 3 weeks, some people called, and I'm not going to tell you all these little small towns that I moved to, because I moved around quite a bit, and it's confusing. So we'll pretend that I stayed in one big town. But some people called who were starting a new group. And they said, if any of the boys want to go to AA meetings, we'll pick them up and bring them back. And I was the first one to volunteer. And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous looking for something. And I found it, the very first meeting I went to. I didn't find the whole thing. I didn't find sobriety, peace of mind, but I found a foundation. I found a beginning. I found a start. And it was in the form of hope. Everything has to start from somewhere. And my sobriety started first out of despair. And I've maintained it, and the maintenance footings of it was through hope. These people gave me hope the first meeting that I went to. I heard them describing how they'd felt after 2 and 3 and 4 months of sobriety, how they could wake up in the middle of the night full of anxiety and fear and perspiring. And I said, I've been like that. And I listened. And they told me that eventually it grew better. That it got better. And I continued to listen. And these people described my condition perfectly to me. And I knew that I was at home. You see, I'd been in a black world for a long, long time. And there wasn't any light in this world. And over in the corner, it looked like just a small crack. And every time I'd head for the light, it would be over in the other direction. But now I came face to face with this light, and it was in the form of hope. And I left that meeting that night, and I can't tell you the feeling that I had. I felt that I was going on a journey. I felt that things were going to be better. I knew in my mind that everything was going to be all right. I knew that. And as I started out, a little lady stopped me. She's a little angel. That's what she was. Now, I might cry a little bit up here, but that's my privilege. If I want to cry some, I'll cry. Now, I cried when I was drunk, too, and then I cry when I'm sober. And I'm not ashamed of it. But she stopped me that night and said, we're glad to have you. And, this was a real switch for me. Nobody's been glad to have me in a long time. And she said, we want you to come back. And this really was a switch. If I ever got in once, they never asked me back. But she asked me to come back. And she said, why don't you have some coffee? And I told her that I didn't have time, that I was with the men from the home. And she said, they'll wait. And she got me some coffee, and I didn't even drink coffee and didn't like it, but I drank that cup. And she talked to me that night about the workings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she said, all these burdens that you're carrying around, you can't take them. She said, I had them myself one time, and I found out that I couldn't live with them. She said, we retain just enough of our past that we don't have to repeat it. We remember how sick we were. We remembered what made us sick. We remember the people that we've harmed. And we start from right now, right this minute, doing the best we can to live the best we can the way this program suggests, a day at a time. And if we live long enough, maybe, perhaps, we can live down some of the things that we've done. If not, we'll certainly be in a better frame of mind. And I left that meeting, and I left a lot of burdens in that room that night. And I went back over there not too long ago and talked at that group, and I could see, at first I wondered how much these people were being paid to come out there and get us. This was how skeptical I was. I wondered about these people, and I wondered about their pay. And then when I made that talk that night, where the burdens were left, they're still there, I guess. I hope they stay there. I don't want them back. But I saw those people who gave me encouragement. I saw Barney, and I saw Bill and Freeman and Martha. I saw them shed a tear, and I knew they were getting their pay. I was sicker than most people, and I was given a job in a little town not too far from there, and it's where I met my sponsor. It's where I met a lot of wonderful people. When I was discharged from Damascus home, I went there, and I told them that I was an alcoholic, and that I had a job, that all I wanted to do was stay sober, and I needed their help. And I believe everybody in that group shook my hand that night and said, we're glad to have you. One fellow in particular took a little, about the same age. He took a lot of time, and he talked with me that night. He said, Bryant, you don't look too much different from me. He said, when I came in, they told me if I started feeling nervous, edgy, frustrated, excited, or anything, to call somebody when I started feeling this way, and they would help me. And if you do the same thing that I did, you're going to get this way. You're going to get all excited one night. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get upset. And you're going to feel like maybe a beer or drink will help you. He said, it won't. But if you call me, I can help you before you take the drink. I met a lot of people that night. I was given a lot of advice that night. I was told to go to as many meetings as I could that night, and I left feeling better about this group of people. And not long after that, I was a little upset one night, and I called Mac, and Mac said, I'll be over there in 10 minutes. He came over and we drank coffee that night, and when he left, I felt better. I didn't drink that night, just like he said. About 2 months after that, I felt the same way, and I called Mac, and he said, I feel just about the same way you do tonight. We'll call somebody else. And all three of us stayed sober that night because we made the telephone call, and it worked. They didn't tell me anything to do. They just discussed things in general. And Bryant stayed sober that night. They told me to go to meetings, and to meetings I went. And like I said, I didn't have my head on exactly straight. I didn't have I wasn't dealing out of a full deck, I don't believe, that to start with, because I do some real weird things. And the group started worrying about me. I didn't have a sponsor. And I was sort of just hanging loose. That's what I was doing, and they started worrying about me, so they assigned me a sponsor. And this ain't too good. Sometimes, if you're here today and you don't have a sponsor, get you one, because everybody, I think, needs a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. They assigned a man as my sponsor that if I'd have had to chosen him, he would have been the last person on the face of the earth that I would have chosen. He was everything that I didn't want to be. He was loud. He was profane. Well, I just didn't like him. But he called me up behind the podium one night and he said, I want to talk to you. He said, I don't like this any more than you do, but they've asked me to be your sponsor. And I said, oh. He said, yes. He said, you've been coming to our meetings, and you've been eating our cake and drinking our coffee. And he said, you don't even wash your cup. You don't empty your ashtray. You don't put anything into the program, and you're not getting anything out of it. And he said, the only thing that I know of that you're doing all right now is this. And he turned around and pointed to one of the slogans that says, easy does it. He said, you're doing right well with that one. And he also told me that night that I was going to have to start working on some steps. He said, you've been coming to these closed meetings, and we share with each other about these steps, and we work on them. And what makes you think you're any different from anybody else? What makes you think that you're not going to have to work on these steps? I suggest that you start doing something for this group. I suggest that you start doing something for yourself tonight. I washed some coffee cups that night. I've been washing them ever since. I almost hate to see styrofoam cups come out, because that's one thing I can do is wash coffee cups and empty ashtrays. But I started putting something into Alcoholics Anonymous. I started halfway working the steps. And in the 5th chapter of the big book, it says, half measures availed us nothing. But here's another thing that I want to point out to you today, too. If you're here and this is a half-measure thing with you, if you're halfway working it, you're just half enjoying it. That's all I got to say. You're just half enjoying the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because it takes a complete and total surrender to this program of Alcoholics Anonymous to have the happiness and the joy that I know today. I've tried it both ways. I didn't read that in the book. I tried that. I tried it. It didn't work. So, if I have any advice or anything to give to you today, it's a total surrender to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I stayed sober. I didn't have my family back, and everybody else. I went to my sponsor and I said, it's easy for you guys to stay sober. You got your wife with you. You got your family. And I said, I feel like I need to have my family back in order to stay sober. He said, the big book don't say that. And that's the first time I ever read the big book. It's to prove him a lie. And it says that. It says wife or no wife. And it also says in another point that never let an alcoholic tell you that he can't stop drinking without his family. This just isn't so. And I asked him if he didn't think I ought to go talk to my wife, and he said, no, N-A-W. That's all he said. I stayed there, and I hated him even more. I stayed sober 6 months, and they gave me a 6-month chip token, and everybody hugged my neck, you know, and put their arms around me and said, we're proud of you. Everybody but him, and he didn't say anything, and I said, you think I ought to go see my wife? He said, no. I kept walking along. I was going to meetings, and I was halfway working the steps. I went to every meeting in town or out of town. Anytime a car left, I went. I even went with the boy to work one night. I thought he was going to Aberdeen to a meeting. But I stayed sober. I didn't get drunk that night. Christmas was fast approaching, and my first birthday was fast approaching. My sponsor told me, said, we're going to give you your chip a day early. We believe you can make it. And another reason we're going to give it to you is we ain't going to have no meeting on Christmas Day. And I asked him, I said, well, do you think I ought to go see my wife? He said, no. And I said, well, what am I going to do about this bicycle and gifts that I got from a little girl? You know, every drunk has to have a charge account, and I'd open up some charge accounts there and charge a few gifts to take to her. He said, don't worry about it, I'll take you. Christmas Eve. Let me tell you about this hateful man. He had his children there who'd come to visit him from out of town. He had his grandchildren there. And it was Christmas Eve, and they were having their Christmas party. And they were waiting for Granddaddy, but Granddaddy took time out to take this old drunk 40 miles to deliver those gifts. That's how hateful he was. I don't know if anybody in or out of AA that do it today, but he did it. He did it because he loved me. He went with us to get married when we got married, and he's been an awful lot to me in my life. The sponsor. You see, when I got there were about 45 people in that meeting. And when he first came into Alcoholics Anonymous, he was the only one. Many is the time that he'd gone down and made a fire in the club room and sit there and made a pot of coffee and sit there and read the big books for an hour and nobody showed up. But he didn't give up because he knew that there were some drunks who needed sobriety, who needed AA, and he kept the doors open for them. And when I got there, a few years later, there were 45 of us there, possibly as a result of his patience. So I don't have anything to say against him today. The only thing I can say is I love him, and he's meant an awful lot to me. An awful lot. I'd been sober 18 months, and I asked him if I could go see my wife, and he said yes. And I went to see my wife, and I told her that I'd been sober for 18 months. She said, I know it. I haven't seen your name in the paper. I told her that I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she said, I heard that it's a wonderful organization. And I told her that I had an awful lot of friends in AA. And she said, that's good. You needed some. You didn't have any when you left here. And I could tell by this time that things weren't going too well as far as any reconciliation is concerned. And she finally told me that if I stayed sober the rest of my life, and she hoped I did, that we weren't going to live together anymore. So I called my sponsor. He told me to call him the minute I left the house. And he said, come on back. And I went back, and I used to say that I accepted it right away, but I didn't. I eventually accepted it, but I didn't accept it right away. I moved to another group. My job and everything, I had a change in jobs, a better job, and I moved to another group that didn't know me. And immediately I became an authority on Alcoholics Anonymous. All the 12-step work that was done in this group, I did it. Old timer, sober 15 years, the phone would ring. I joined the club room that stayed open all the time. The old timers would be sitting there, and the phone would ring, and they said, it's a 12-step call, and they want to speak to you. Now, this did me an awful lot of good. You know, somebody has been sober 15 years, and here I was, only been sober a few months, and they were calling for me. I said, well, I've got to go take that message. They didn't call it the message in the group then. They call it the mess. He's carrying the mess, they said. But I found out later why I was getting these calls, that these men that called me had been calling that group for 15 years. At least once a month. For 15 years. They didn't want to stay sober, but they were letting me practice on them. They let me practice for a long time, and I spun my wheels for a long time, but I stayed sober. And one day I was chairman of the group, and I looked around, and I didn't see any of these multitudes that I'd been treating. I'd been spending all days and nights with them and getting jobs for them and getting them back with their families, and I didn't see any of them at the meeting. And I told one of the old homers, I said, look, they're the most ungrateful people in the world. Look at what I've done for them, and they don't even appreciate it enough to come to the meeting. And he handed me the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, I've got news for you, buddy. He said, if you want to stay sober and you want to help somebody else, you better read this book and you better apply it in your life. Don't you going to get drunk and you won't even be able to help yourself. He told me, he said, I want you to start on page 1. He said, no, start on the flyleaf. You might find something there. And I started, and I'm glad I didn't start on page 1 because I read Dr. Silkworth's letter there. And here was a man that was laying his career, his medical reputation on the line. And he had high regard for this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and his last sentence in his letter said, you may rely on anything these people tell you about themselves. And I started thinking about this wonderful man, this great man that had helped so many people, that said that they could rely on anything that I said about myself. And I'd been lying from podiums like this, you know. I'd been making Bryant look a little better. And I'd go down as far as I could, and then I thought everybody was supposed to outlie the other, you know. But his statement says that anybody could rely on what I told them. And I knew that this was the beginning of honesty in my life. Not admitting that I was powerless over alcohol, that was a necessity. That was a necessity. I did that to keep breathing in and out. But when I started being honest about myself, to bearing the facts about myself, the kind of fellow that I was, then and then only did I have relief and peace. I read this book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I read about the disease of alcoholism and what was wrong with me. The only way I know to describe it is, it's been just like I was going to school. You know, I went to school and I enjoyed playing with the boys and girls, and I enjoyed recess and lunch and stuff like that. But I didn't learn anything until I got books. They gave me books, textbooks, and I started studying and I learned something. And the big book is the basic textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous. And until I started studying it, I didn't learn anything about myself, about alcoholism. I'm grateful, really, for the fellowship that people offered me, because I don't know what I would have done without it. I would have been drunk. But the fellowship and the people were not sufficient for total recovery within me. I had to learn about myself, and I had to learn about alcoholism, and I had to learn about a program of recovery. You know, I looked pretty good on the outside. By that time, I had a new sport coat and a new suit. But I hadn't looked on the inside at Bryant. I hadn't looked at some of the deep-seated resentments that I had. There were a lot of things that I hadn't looked at, and I didn't like them. I didn't like them, but I knew that I had to get rid of them. And I started, to the best of my ability, working this program. I tried to be thorough and fearless from the very start. I had a written inventory the way the book said. And doors began to open for me. On the bottom of page 83 and the top of page 84 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous are 14 of the most beautiful promises that's ever been given to any man. To anybody, whether they be alcoholic or not. And on completion, the first 9 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous, this was true. It said if we are painstaking about this phase of our illness, that we'll be amazed before we're halfway through making amends. We'll be amazed before we are halfway through. And I knew this new freedom that they were talking about. I knew that. This economic insecurity they were talking about, the whole thing, I have known each of these promises in my life. I have been given first freedom from alcohol. Next, I was given freedom from myself. Next, I was allowed to make peace with my fellow man and my God. You know, when God gave this program to Bill and Dr. Bob, He didn't give them a half program. He didn't give them something that keeps you sober. He gave us something to keep us sober and happy. You know, I'm so grateful today that this old man took time to give me this book. I'm so glad that he was insistent that I read it. I'm even more glad that he was insistent that I continue to study it and try to apply it in my life. And miracles began to happen. And if there's anything that I want to talk to you today about, it's miracles. Miracles come from God. You see, I was agnostic. I was anything but a believer. And I recall what Dr. Bob says in his story about the book. He said, if you think you're an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride that will keep you from accepting what is in this book, then I feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for you. I had to believe in there's an entire chapter now this devoted to me, and it's we agnostics. And I read this chapter, and I read this chapter, and I read this chapter. And gradually, the meaning of a spiritual life came to me, and gradually, God started doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And when God started this, and I let Him start, miracles started happening in my life. I'd always wanted to work with drunks. I enjoyed it. It was a part of my life. And I was given an opportunity to go back to Damascus home as superintendent of the same home that I'd been a patient at a few years before. And why was I given this opportunity? It's by the grace of God, and because I now had a message instead of a mess. I had a message. And the message was the same that you gave to me, a message of hope and a message of love. I was lonely. Not as for a lack of company, because I had plenty of friends in Alcoholics Anonymous. Wonderful friends. But I needed a companion, and they told me if I didn't get my wife back, I'd get another one. And I did. I met her in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we were married. My sponsor went with us, and we're happy today. The two happiest people that I know of. We work this program together, and we love each other, and we love Alcoholics Anonymous, and we love God. A miracle that I never dreamed would exist. I never dreamed I'd be happy with anyone. but nevertheless it's mine. I had a little girl that was 5 years old when I quit drinking, and I loved her as much as I was capable of loving anyone. But I carried her those presents that Christmas, and she didn't want them. She said, I don't want to see you. You're not my daddy, and I don't love you. And this hurt. This hurt deeply. And I was told that if I would have faith and that if I would love, that love would come to me. This last Christmas, I carried this girl some gifts, the same as the other Christmas, and it was a lot different. She's going to be a freshman in college next year, and I told her, I said, honey, I'm extremely proud of you for doing as well as you've done under the circumstances. Because of the type of father I was, you've been a success, and I want to congratulate you and tell you how proud I am of you. And she said, Daddy, I don't want you to sell yourself short. If I had to be like anybody in the world, if I had to choose to be like anybody in the world today, I'd want to be like you. And, you know, money don't buy things like that. And it was given to me through the grace of God and because people like you loved me. There's so many things, so many miracles that have happened in my life. The same judge that used to sentence me, I stood before him with a bowed head, and he said, what am I going to do with you? He said, I've given you an active sentence of non-pros cases. I'll find you. I don't know what to do. He said, I've sent you off for treatment. You tell me what to do. And I said, John, I don't know. I don't know what to do. But I've had the privilege of seeing this same judge call me back into his court. And have a group of men there who were in the same state of body and mind that I was a few years before. And he said, this is a man that's found a new life. And if you want to be released in his custody, if you want to stay sober, I'll release you in his custody. The same judge that used to sentence me. A miracle, yes. Yes. I was in a conference in Durham a few years ago, and I met a psychiatrist there that used to try to shrink me a little bit. And he was a boy that I'd gone to school with. And he ran me out of his office one day. He said, I've never seen as big a liar as you are in my life. Just leave. And I saw him at a conference there, and he said, you look good. I said, thank you. He said, you're sober. I said, yes, I hope so. He said, how long have you been sober? And I told him how long I'd been sober, and he had to sit down. He said, what type of work are you doing? And I told him that, and this amazed him too. To make a long story short, he was waiting for the limousine to take him out to the airport, and he missed it. We were talking about the miracle that's come about in my life, and he was happy for me. And you know, I used to, from a podium like this, I used to speak down on psychiatrists that they didn't understand. They didn't understand. But after I was honest with this man, he understood. And he had nothing but praise for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and people like you. So he does understand, and this is another miracle. I never will forget, I was fired from a job one time, and this man said, I might talk to you about working for me again, but I want you to go by my preacher's house, and I want you to pray with him. And I went by there, and this preacher asked me if I wanted to pray with him, and I said yes. And we got down on our knees and we prayed, and we got up, and I had a pint of wine in my pocket, and it was sticking out like that between the split of my coat, and he said, I have never in my life seen a man like you. Never have I seen a man like you. I spoke at his church a few years ago, and he introduced me as a miracle from God and told everybody that he loved me. So miracles happen, friends. Miracles happen if we let them. So you see a man that's tried both ways. I've tried it without Alcoholics Anonymous. I've tried it with it. I've tried with Alcoholics Anonymous, not working the steps, not working it to the best of my ability, and I've tried it working it to the best of my ability. And I've seen the results. And I'm here today to bear witness and testimony that if we're painstaking about this part of our life, if we're willing to trust God and to clean house, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. Amazed. So I can sum it all up by saying it's a miracle that's happened to me. It's a miracle that I'm alive today. It's a miracle that I'm as happy as I am today. It's a miracle that I have as many friends as I do today. And you know, for a fellow that didn't believe in God, it really is something. I can't close without telling you about God as I understand Him. You see, when I first came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was sick. And you people were happy. And I wanted to be like you. I wanted to be able to laugh with a real laugh instead of a fake, phony laugh. I wanted to do that worse than anything in the world. And I followed in your footsteps. And I tried to do the things that you suggested that I do to make me happy. I tried to find out what you had. And when I finally found out what you had, I had it myself. When I was able to laugh, when I was able to tell you that I loved you, I knew what you had. You had the love of God in your heart. And it was given to me. The knowing, the understanding, the realization was given to me through people like you. They took me by the hand and said, I love you. Just a few at a time. And then I was able to understand. I was able to believe. And now I'm able to trust that God can and will continue to help me if I would let Him. So every day of my life, I wake up and I said, a few years ago you were sick. And you don't want to be like that again, do you? No. Well, all it takes is a drink. You have a choice today. God's given you a choice to stay drunk or sober. And I make my decision to stay sober that day. I don't ask God to keep me sober anymore. This is my job, keeping sober. I ask God to give me the power to carry His will out in my life each day. And so far, He's given it to me. He's given me so much, and I've given so little. But that's what the grace of God is all about. It's an undeserved reward. And it's my hope and my prayer that the grace of God will be with each and every one of us, that we might know and realize His presence in our lives. Thank you, and I love all.